Morning, everyone. Sean from Nala here. Delighted that you've made it here on this beautiful sunny morning here in Laois. It's a little bit frosty, but I hope it's nice where you are. I'll be leading the session today. We'll be looking at creating and designing forms using plain English. We've got a lot of people on the registered list, but 250 people have registered. But as you know, running events, if we get half of that or close to 200, we'll be very, very happy. So just thanks very much for coming along. My colleague Katrina Whelan is here. Katrina's going to say hello.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Very
How are
welcome
you?
today.
All right. So I'll be presenting folks, and then Katrina is gonna be helping me out with any questions you have or any issues we have. But hopefully everything will run smoothly. So that's the plan. So let me share my screen and we'll get started, and then as more people drift in, we'll include them. Great. People are drifting in. So the webinar is being recorded, folks. So just so you know that.
But do you have anything to say beforehand? Bye, love you. Goodbye, have fun today.
Hey, folks.
Love
you. You're all very welcome, folks. Just keep yourself muted if you have if you have the ability to. Great, thank you. So the webinar is going to be recorded. And like we did last time, this is part of a series. We had two guest speakers last time. You might remember Louise State and Leanne Caulfield, who were great speakers. And it's nice if people just introduce themselves in the chat. So find the chat box, folks, and just in the chat, tell us like your name, the organization you're from, your role in your organization, and then one thing you'd like to learn about plain English and forms. So hopefully we'll learn lots today and we'll learn from each other. But just it's nice when people introduce themselves. So just in the chat, folks, just please tell us your name, your org, your role, and one thing you'd like to learn about plain English and forms. I'll try to do it in one message if that's okay. And then we'll get started formally. Yeah, so we're going to have lots of interactive elements, folks. So there's a question answer box, so you can put your questions in there or you can put them in the chat. We've got 90 people in the session, so it can be a bit, your question might get lost, but Katrina is going to help us out keeping an eye on questions. Like last time, folks, it helps me as a presenter if we have 10 volunteers to turn their camera on. So if you feel comfortable having your camera on, please do just say yes to camera in the chat, and then we'll find you amongst the 100 people who are here, and we'll give you power to turn your camera on. Or maybe you have it already. I'm not sure if I turned it off, but I should have turned it off if I didn't. So yeah, that's the plan, folks. If you want to turn your camera on to help me as a presenter to present to you, just 10 volunteers to turn their camera on. That'll be great. Lovely. And then the plan for the webinar, folks, let's get into it. What we're going to look at is what makes a good form. We're going to look at not so good practice. We're going to look at good practice. And then we're going to look at a form that someone sent in from Kildare, the Wicklow Youth Reach. So we're going to hopefully look at not so good practice, and then do a workshop with a real form. That's the plan, folks. So I'm just going to check the chat and see. Yeah, people are really putting their points in there, which is really, really good. That's fantastic, folks. Okay, so my first question, folks, just to get us warmed up, okay? So in our organizations, we use lots of forms. We might use Microsoft Forms, we might use SurveyMonkey, we might use Microsoft Word, we might convert them to PDFs, so many different ways of making a form nowadays. But just whatever we're making, we want to make sure it's a good form. So very soft opening question. Just in the chat box, folks, I know you might still be introducing yourselves, but in the chat, just what are your one or two things for making sure a form is like a high quality form? What are you keeping in mind as your principles? So that's what I want you to ask. Well, that's what I want you to answer, folks. Just in the chat box, what makes a good form? Yeah. So many key points here, folks. I'll just read through a couple of them. I love Anne-Marie's points. Enough room to write what you need to. I mean, I think that's such a crucial one, isn't it? And sometimes we overlook it, or it can be overlooked. Clear outline and direct questions, clear good color. Color is an interesting one because do we have a color printers if we're printing them out? I think your point, Brian, fewest questions possible and simplest possible way. QR codes, that's interesting. The user is clear and how to complete the form. I think that's a good point, Tanya. The tab order, yeah, so accessibility and making sure there's a clear structure. The voting jargon that people might understand. Thanks, Bernie. And yeah, thanks, Chris. The benefit of the Likert scale and semantic differential and getting useful information. That's yeah, so we have lots of different people here who might be using forms for all sorts of different things, academic forms or just forms for people to start on courses. So that is really, really good, folks. Looking for anything else that's a bit different than what people have said. You can see your colleagues also there, folks. Lovely. Okay. So, like for me, the characteristics of a good form are like, so in the work that I do in the plain English service in Mala, folks, you know, we work with organizations to help them like edit their forms into plain language. And for me, sometimes the problem is there's a lack of clear flow, you know, and they have so much information they want to get from people, or there's so much information they want to give to people, they don't think of how they're going to organize it. So I think about that as a key thing. So what's the flow? How do I go from like start to the finish, in a very easy way? Because like when we're interacting with people, as you know, you don't want people to turn people away. You don't want to make it hard for people in any sort of way. And forms can be such a barrier sometimes, you know? So how can we make sure forms are the least amount of a barrier as they can be? Clear instructions. So like ideally, like forms should have like a very, very minimum of instructions. When you start overdoing instructions, people start turning off or they don't read them, or sometimes I'll look at forms and they have like the same instruction 5 different times and 5 different wordings. And that just turns people off. For me, like clear sections, you know, so like when you're planning or editing anything, you want to have like clear sections so you can see this is this part, this is that part, and then I can see if they how to organize them well. Enough space to write, not too long, and then questions are relevant. Like not too long is such a key point. Like how long is long enough? But like you really want to just be getting the minimum from people, because the more you ask, the more burden you put on people, and the harder it becomes for them to answer. So they're my kind of key points, folks. Accessibility should be there, so we'll talk a bit about that. But yeah, so what we're going to do, folks, is I'm going to show you an example of a not so good form. So I've sent you a link to this by email, but I'll also put it in the chat. So the idea, folks, is to make this a bit interactive rather than me just talking at you. We're going to look at some examples, and I want you to do a bit of work analyzing them. And if we had a job of editing these or restructuring these into easy to use forms, how would we do it? So we're going to look at this form here, folks, from our friends in Galway City Council. So I really love Galway City Council. I did a training session with them recently, and I think this form is interesting because yeah, how can we make it easier for people who are interacting with it? So it's got a candidate information booklet, you know, and here we have this checklist to start. You know, well, I should say, what do we have to start? We have the closing date. Very, very good. We have that. Then we have the checklist. And yeah, so what we're going to do, folks, is I want you to just open up that link that I sent you and just spend a couple of minutes, if it's possible, just to read through that. Read through that Word document and just put yourself in the shoes of the candidates applying for this job, okay? And I want you to tell me what's making it harder than needs to be, okay? So just scan through the whole thing. Maybe don't put your answers in until you've scanned through the whole thing, you've read different parts of it. So maybe spend just a couple of minutes reading through it, and we'll talk about, you know, what's making it harder than needs to be, okay? And then we'll talk about what's strong about it as well. So just do that for 5 minutes, folks. A bit workshoppy, but here we go. How would we improve on this? So that's the task, okay? Thank you very much. I'll give you 5 minutes and I'll be quiet. Good work, folks. So if you're just joining us, I put a link there to a form from Galway City Council about a job application, So we just asked you to read through it, to pick out things that are potentially challenging, and we'll talk about how we can improve them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of things that are strong about this, but I think the things that are hard really take away from the strong things. So I like hearing people's voices, folks. So I might just ask one or two people if they feel comfortable just to speak. So I might give you, maybe if you could, I'm not sure if you can unmute folks, but Jean, can you unmute and just make that point aloud to the group? Jean Sutton.
Yeah. I find that like not as many people have like Word downloaded or Adobe on their computers anymore. A lot of people don't have computers. And need to pay for all these things now. So a lot of people are reliant on their phones. And like one of my close friends, her Arts Council grant, she downloaded it and she freaked out when the alignment all got thrown off, and she would have much preferred to fill in an online form. And she kind of felt like it would damage her prospects. And yeah, she was just freaking out because she doesn't have access to a computer with all the software on it.
Yeah, that's so important to consider, like the how people are interacting with the phone. I think that's crucial. So having an online option and having a print version is very good. Chris, do you want to come in?
For coffee at the
Yeah,
bottom.
first things first, I actually work for a local authority and I see forms like this all the time. And I think for anybody with any kind of literacy difficulties, I would just get to the second page and give up. It is way too dense. The information that's asked for upfront would discourage you. They're looking for it's for a foreman, and although it would be a generalization to say it's non-academic, it's most likely to be people who have reached that particular level of academic achievement. So an explanation as to why the information has been sought, an explanation about the role and the duties of job. I know, because I say I work in this environment.
Yeah.
We have one candidate information leaflet, which has the particulars of the job again, which is far too detailed. And this, I think, is it 8 or 10 pages long. I did scroll right to the end, but I lost the will to live after a while. No, it's impossible to read. It is way too compressed, way too dense, way too off-putting for somebody who might have literacy difficulties. And looking for information that really, to my mind, are not that strictly necessary for the job. That could come after the event.
Yeah,
I think even in the application form, the day-to-day role of this will be, for that reason we need, and then go down if they have technical qualifications in the area that would be useful for foremen in engineering, in school academic work. I think if I had, and I've dealt with people who had literacy difficulties.
Their experience.
Sorry, folks, just keep yourself muted there if you're if that's okay. Thanks. Sorry, Chris, please.
Yeah, no, but no, sorry, and I don't want to go on for too long. But no, I think these and almost all application forms for local authorities are far too dense to that would put people off. I think it needs to be far simpler. And I did have a chance to have a look at some of. Now I know it's for something a lot simpler. The other forms that you've put up, even visually, less compressed, easier to read, easier to flow, less likely to give you a challenge.
You're jumping ahead of my webinar, but that's good. Thank you, Chris.
Sorry, okay. Yeah, no, sorry.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. I really value that input. Thank you so much. That is that's very valuable to hear you say that. So other points so Liz, yeah, you please, Liz, come in and then we'll move along. Liz.
I agree with Chris. It's far too dense, and the checklist is not a checklist; it's an essay. And that is it. You just need points. If people want to check something, they don't read an essay, and then it repeats itself on page 12. And I agree with Chris. The layout's really bad. The use of red type is aggressive, and swapping from capitals to small case. there's no logic in it. There's no consistency of approach. So it's a really hard form to follow for most people. You know, you don't have to have poor literacy to find this form like something out of the 50s.
Yeah. So I think it needs a bit of work. I think someone makes the point that the kind of core of the form where they're looking for information, I think is it's decent, you know, like there's enough space there as well, and it's just a case of like there's too much instructions. The instructions kind of run throughout it. The red underline makes things quite hard, and they're using kind of a mix of different tones, folks. So we'll get on to other things, but it's good looking at just structure and flow as the key things as well. So like if you look at here, copy of certificates to establish eligibility for this position are required to be submitted with the application form as one complete PDF document. Like when I see something like that as a plain English editor, like that's a please, and like it shouldn't kind of be there. It should be like at the start, or it should be. If it's here, you shouldn't be like, make sure you're not repeating yourself, or if you're repeating yourself, it's irrelevant. But then you have here like a please include. So I think like if your instructions are please include, just, you know, that's a good way to do it. So there's kind of there's good practice in it, and then there's kind of things that are a bit old fashioned in it as well. Anything else I want to say? Yeah, but I think there's the kind of some core elements of it are decent, you know. But I think it's just the flow and the instructions that are kind of catching them up. And I think sometimes, like, I don't work in a local authority, but I do lots of things with local authorities sometimes. And what seems to happen is that people don't fill out the form correctly. And instead of kind of like thinking, oh, let's rejig the form, or let's use like user experience to kind of, you know, put the user needs first, but like, we'll just add more instructions, but then the more instructions you add, the less people actually read it, you know, because people just want to do the easiest thing possible, which is, you know, fill in the form, and they'll skip past the instructions and they'll come back to the instructions when they're looking for like what's wrong. So, and I think your points there, Liz, about turning the checklist actually into a checklist is a good point, because it's not really a checklist at the moment, is it? It's kind of a set of instructions. So, like, just to give a plug, folks, like what could help us? Well, like for things like this to generate instructions, like you could read that and you could do a really good job on it and edit it very clearly. And, you know, ChatGPT can help you as well. So I'm not I don't have any stocks in OpenAI, but like if you give it a prompt, like, I should have had the prompt ready, folks, but let's do it together. Can you never type when people are looking at me. Can you turn this into a clear to read checklist for a person applying for a job? I'll make sure there's not too many typos. And then I'm just gonna ask it a question, and then I'm
Sean,
gonna clear the space. Yeah.
just while that's coming up with an answer, Sandra Eaton had her hand up there as well for a question or a point maybe that you want to raise, Sandra.
Thanks, Katrina. It's fine. The final point that Sean made was exactly the point I wanted to make, that the tone just felt like the organisation was protecting itself in the event of somebody not filling in the form properly. So you totally made the point I wanted to make. Thank you, Katrina.
See, Katrina doesn't know that I'm a mind reader, Sandra, and I read your mind. I'm joking.
That's it.
Thanks, Sandra. Thank you, Katrina. Yeah, so this is ChatGPT, folks, and you can see that it's kind of what's it doing? Well, complete application format, type submission, email submission, postal delivered submission. I don't like the word submission, but original certificates, previous qualifications, application review, even using subheadings, making it a bit more scannable to get through what we're actually going to get through, and it's a bit shorter. So I could refine that. But like if I was tasked with, okay, turning these instructions into plain language, I'd read them, understand them, and then think about how we could use ChatGPT if possible. Or if, let's say I had like 20 of these to do, you know, or 30 of these to do, or potentially. Mary, do you want to come in on a point? Just unmute and speak aloud.
Myself, sorry, am I unmuted now? I am.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
I just thinking, Sean, as well, from the public sector duty, I mean, they're really not doing themselves any favors, aside, you know, that they have to make all their services accessible. And the Disability Act for, you know, for people, because there's a hell of a lot of people out there with the literacy levels, and one of the things we used to do is actually put them through readability checkers to see what level of education you needed to actually be able to read it in its entirety. So I got lost after page 2, sorry.
Yeah, so I know I'm talking about the instructions at the start, folks, but like a readability checker like this, I'll show you this one, folks. So this is the Hemingway app, and this is a free an online one. So I've just copied and pasted the text into the Hemingway app. which is a free online readability checker. I'm just making sure there's no spaces between the paragraphs because that will give it a false reading. Yeah, so if you wanted to use that to help you analyze the text, it gives you a grade score. So this is based on the US system. So grade 8 and grade 9 is where you want to aim for. That's kind of junior cert, kind of young, curious teenager doing their junior certs, kind of grade 8 or grade 9. For readability, that's what you want to aim for plain English, because you want to be understandable to the general population. So that's kind of what you want to aim for, kind of a young, curious teenager. And then like this grade 14, well, that's kind of like what, 5 years after the junior cert, so that's kind of like undergraduate level. And it's not a very sophisticated thing, but it's just looking at how many words in a sentence, how many polysyllabic words are in a sentence, and then it's giving you a bit of analysis regarding where the passive voice is in blue. So all the passive voice, instead of saying must be submitted, you could say you must, or you please, or you are required to. So that's the hemming up, folks, and that can help you when you're editing text. But yeah, so I think we've talked a lot about this, folks, and that's good. So don't want to talk too much about it. I think there's a lot of good things about it, but we've discussed it very, very well. Lovely. So let's look, folks, at good practice. So I feel a bit nervous showing you this one because I'm sure there's lots of things you'll find that we can improve, and that's a good thing, folks. That is a good thing because like everything can always be improved, and we should always be trying to improve things. So the next one we're going to look at is something we worked on a couple of years ago with the Department of Housing, and it's the Housing Adaptation Grants for older people and people with disability. So what I'm going to ask you to do, folks, is similar to what we just did, is please open up this. I sent this in an email, and I'll put it in the chat. So it's just a case of open up that link there, and local authorities would work with this one as well. So it is a local authority one. So similar to what we just did, folks, but kind of taking this other side of things. What techniques are we using here to make it strong, if that makes sense? So just click the link that's in the chat or the one that's in your email. It should open in a PDF this time. And then for 5 minutes, just down through the different parts of the form. There's a long one, and then we'll talk about what's strong, what we can improve. So I'm just going to put a question first. It's like, what is strong? Then we'll talk about what we can improve. Give yourselves a few minutes, folks, to glance through the whole thing and then put your thoughts there. Thank you so much. So I know it's a long form, folks, but good comments coming in the chat. Yeah, even if you focus on a particular section, we'll talk about it or talk about that. So I know it's very, very long, but lovely. So lots of good comments coming through, folks. And so I'll just pick out a couple of the couple ones. So big things like it's a standalone document. You don't need to go to another document. That's an interesting point, Jamie. I think we worked really hard to make it like that. But then when I went back and looked at some local authorities have like an introductory sheet to it, which I thought was interesting because maybe there's some specific things for each local authority where they have to kind of do that. That might be the case. So that was, yeah, so one standalone document. So I know it's long, but one thing, you feel like you have everything you need. Yeah, and all the different elements we were talking about. Like there is a lot of introductory kind of throat clearing to inform people, but the idea was to like put all the instructions in one place, because when we looked at the previous example, there were lots of instructions kind of at the start and at the end and throughout it. So that could be a bit hard to find exactly what you need to do. And then, you know, for things like this, for government grants, there can be a lot of rules and things like that and information. And so yeah, the color code scheme try to give them a little bit of identity. You want to avoid using too much text in color. So we're just using a little bit of text in color with the headings. Try to avoid text in color otherwise. So you have the tree identity, the tree forms having clear identities of color. You're trying to use some tables to help out a little bit. And, you know, trying to make any of the complicated information like yearly household income flow a bit better with tables. And then when you get to the form itself, so yeah, we worked with the Department of Housing, and I think they had a design team kind of take our kind of Word version and kind of make it kind of an editable PDF. And I think that makes it a little bit easier. Certainly, it's a bit of work. Not something I'm 100% confident in doing myself, but I think it really, if you have a bit of budget and you can get the form into a good shape, it'll take it to the next step by having like a, you know, professional designer or someone who's, you know, good at design to do that, because I think it really pays off in the end. So maybe that kind of investment at the start with a designer, making sure it kind of has it kind of looks good and looks easy to fill out, both PDF and if people print it, will definitely save you time and money in the long run, especially for something like this where it's gonna, you know, be used by thousands of people across quite in different years, maybe tens of thousands. I'm not sure. Any other points that people want to make? Yeah, so I'll keep reading through the good points, folks. I'm just going to put a little message in the chat about like what could we improve, because that's what we want to do as well. Should I say this? I remember doing a training session with a person, and they were talking about this form, and like this has the plain English mark, meaning that it's kind of been through the NALA plain English editing service, and we've worked on it with our team, and then we worked with the Department of Housing and the Government of Ireland to try to, you know, use the plain English guidelines. And I remember someone went to the local authority with feedback regarding the form and saying, oh, I think this form could be improved in like this way. It's a good form, but it could be improved. And the local authority said, you know what, we've been to NALA and they've given it the mark, and you know that means we're done with it, and that's what all it's going to be. And I was like so taken aback, but like, you know, that's things that should always be try to be improved. You know, if anyone ever has any feedback about something, it should be like listened to and welcome. So yeah, that's what I want you to think about, folks. Are there any things we could improve? So Jamie, that's a good point. I'll let other people have a couple of ideas in the chat, and then we'll discuss. Just put your point in the chat, folks, and then we'll discuss when we have a few. So that's an interesting point, Jamie. Would it make sense to have separate forms for each grant? The thing about this one was that a lot of times people will apply for all three at the same time, or people will, therefore, the first two are quite similar, and the third one's a little bit different. So it was like, yeah, a lot of times if one doesn't apply, the second one will apply. So it's just one form for all three, and that was the way they wanted to make it work. Otherwise, you'd have people filling in the same information for three separate things, whereas they can just apply for all three and see what's useful for them. Louise, this is something I don't have too much experience with, so maybe do you want to unmute and talk a little bit about that, please? So when you say text-to-speech read aloud option, yeah.
Sorry, Sean. Yeah, I've used that for a lot of my class materials for people who may not be able to concentrate or even read a lot of what's on the screen. And the text-to-speech just does help with every single step that they do. But there's also, you can do it on phones where you can use the options on your phones. I'm not too familiar with the iPhones, but in the Android, in the settings in there, you can turn that on. So when you're reading something, you tap the screen and then a little book kind of comes up or a little speaker and it reads the whole thing out to you.
Okay, okay. And usually that's built into lots of kind of software. I know it's built into Adobe. I don't use it very much. I know my colleague Claire uses it a bit. I wonder if I could do it now, but I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, I can use it in Microsoft Word.
Okay.
I know there's different formats that can be downloaded. There's different software, but I'm not too sure of how easy that is to do.
Yeah, I think the important thing for that is to have make sure it's accessible, to make sure like there's a clear reading order, that you've structured it well with headings and titles, and make sure each element is labeled as such, so that when it is read by the screen reader, that you can actually then it'll have a flow.
Yeah,
Mary,
that makes sense.
Do you want to come in on that point or a different point?
Yeah, I just coming back in on that point, because I don't know how to do it on the iPhone either. I was just trying there, not able to. But when we use the read aloud, we'd use the immersive reader in Microsoft Word. So maybe it's something similar. Because I have a lot of students who would actually listen to their classwork rather than read it as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Mary. And I think not to get off topic too much, but I read a blog yesterday from a gentleman who works in an organization called Invisible Thread, and he was talking about the Notebook LM. Have you heard about that? Is it from Google? And basically, if you have a long document, you can kind of copy and paste it into like ChatGPT into like generative AI, and it'll come up with a podcast. So say you wanted to like hear about, I don't know, like something that's really, really dry. I don't know, like say the government published a report on like housing for all, and it was like 200 pages, and you wanted to have like a short 10-minute condensed audible version. So what it'll do is it'll convert it into two people speaking about it in a podcast format. So I'll put a link to that in the chat, but that was something I saw yesterday. So it's just a case of like Mary's point and Louisa's point, like everyone loves audio. Like we're all listening to so much audio nowadays, and it can be very easy to people take in, and that's a tool that can help you. So I'll send the link to that. I'll just keep an eye on the points here. Donna, that's interesting. Do you want to? That's interesting. Do you want to speak a bit about that? Why would you say that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things where it seems,
but
where it tells you we're here to help you, and I don't know. I think it might read better without those, if you know what I mean. If I'm being told I need help, I might feel I'm being talked down to.
Yeah. So the word help there is used 5 times in 2 paragraphs. Yeah. So I think that's a good point. That's a good point. Donna, thank you so much. A colleague of mine called Helen Ryan, who works for Solus now. She would all make the same point as you. She'd say, help, like, who are we saying people need help? You know, we're here to support them. We're here to like they can do what they need to do. We're not helping them, you know, these are their rights, these are their entitlements, you know. So that's a good point, Donna. And yeah, I think that's a good tone you want to achieve. So the tone we wanted to achieve was a helpful tone, but if you overuse the word help, it can seem to be a bit condescending. So that's a good point. People with the blue-green color blindness may have difficulty on page 1. Oh God. It's a good point. Liz, to think about that, you know, yeah, color blindness. That's why we try to avoid bright green and red in design. So that's good to consider. And then the point about data protection from Pascal, linked data protection. Using bold and underlining. Do we use both? Do we use underlining? I think that piece of underlining there. So we usually don't use underlining, folks, for the reason that it kind of distorts the shape of letters. But you see the way our compromise with the department was that it's not cutting off the lowercase p there, because that's what sometimes happens. So we try to use underline. We don't use underline very much or at all. We use bold a lot more for emphasis.
It's just overkill.
Mm.
It's like you're using both. It's like you're shouting at somebody.
Good point, Liz. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but how that snuck in? They must have snuck it in after. Anyway, maybe we gave in to them on that one because we had lots of when you have lots of things with a client and you kind of think, okay, we'll give you that one. Thanks, Katrina, for putting that in the chat. And then just last point, could we break down point C into the top section to a little list? Let me just have a look at that. Yeah, it's a good point. Catherine, I can see your logic. And it might be one of those things where we looked at how we wanted to have all this on one page. And I know that's creeping to having a form that's not usable or that's not plain English. But yeah, maybe you could put C into a bullet point. But sometimes you want things to be on one page, Have the document checklist there as well. Yeah, that's a good point, Catherine. That's a good point, John. So many browsers can emulate visual deficiencies to check how content looks for the colorblind and other issues. Yeah, so like there's so many different software folks that we can use. So I'm going to move on from that. And that was kind of I've got lots to cover, folks. So that's really good. So thanks so much for your points on that, and I'll take them away, the points you said to improve it, and I'll feed them back to the department if they're going to iterate on it to the next version. So reference guides. Yeah, that's kind of what I want to get to, Brian, a little bit. So in terms of reference guides, folks, one of the best that kind of just gives like clear guidance on like how to make a form flow, have good structure, use plain language. It's from the NDA, from the National Disability Authority. So if you're not aware of this toolkit, folks, it's the Customer Communications Toolkit for Services to the Public. It covers written, spoken, and signed, and digital communications. And it has a checklist on like written communication for form design. And, it gives, the things that we kind of illustrated there, clear title, clear instructions, official use only at the end, have headings, and avoid unnecessary repeated questions. So all the points we kind of instinctively know, but it kind of gives us a good format to check it. And then they have a section on digital forms. And they're, all the points from print kind of are relevant. And then it kind of goes into more detailed things regarding online ones. Yeah, so I'll just point out that, folks, that there's good resources there from the NDA. Yeah, perfect. So that's, yeah, I'll put it in the chat before the end at the link to that toolkit. It's just the Customer Communications Toolkit for Services to the Public. What a title, from the National Disability Authority. But I'll put a link in the chat before the end. And then, folks, so this is kind of your point here, Catherine. So I'd love to complete forms if they're online. So this is something to keep an eye on, folks. So the Government of Ireland and the kind of HSE have this kind of project that's ongoing about kind of standardizing forms that government produce into like a good quality, So there's agreement between the HSE and the OGCIO, which is the Office of the Government's Chief Information Officer. So like these principles are really helpful, but they're still only principles, So we have to kind of see how they're going to put them into action, and then I think they're good principles. So if we just read through a couple of these, we'll design forms to meet users' needs. I think that number one, as we looked at the example from the local authority, potentially that wasn't happening. So this is like the key one that we have to keep in mind the whole time. We use a question protocol. Okay, that sounds complicated. So what do they mean by that? It means like question protocol makes us question why we're asking users for each piece of information. So I think that's essential. So why are we asking for this information? That's good information to see how they do it. They'll use a style guide. So I think you want to have a bit of consistency across the different forms that you're creating. So having a style guide will help. And then this is one I think that is ideal. It might not always be possible, especially if you work in the NGO sector, but like we use content and UX designers to design our forms. So like I think you can do a lot in Word to make your forms simple and usable. And if you have the budget or you have especially relevant form, I think it can be very useful to have a you know, a content UX designer or a designer to help you with it. People are moving away from forms in PDF because of accessibility issues, you know. So I think there'll always be a need to have a paper form for lots of reasons. So that'll be something to see, like, how can the government make sure forms are online, they're safe, data is kept safe, things are working very well, and PDF versions are seen as kind of a fallback. If that makes sense. Yeah, and then making sure forms are accessible, you know, so making sure everyone can use them. So that people using screen readers, people using other sort of assistive technology, user testing, test forms with users, and improve existing forms, you know. So you don't want to just kind of turn like the old form into a digital form. You want to like restructure it and think about the user needs. And like that point there, we'll keep people's information safe and tell them why we ask for it. So there's 9 points, folks, and I think, you know, I think we can adopt them as good points to keep in mind when we're designing forms. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how the government progress with that, and then hopefully that'll, you know, we can learn a bit more from that and have some inputs on it. And then, like, so that's the Government of Ireland folks working on that with HSE. And an organisation I think it's good to keep an eye on regarding like best practice in terms of forms. It's Gov.uk. So if you do attend a webinar with myself, you'll know I'm always talking about Gov.uk and how they do things, because they have a digital content team over there who are really excellent, and they're always trying to improve things. So they're kind of a few years ahead of us, I think, in terms of what the government are trying to do, trying to publish forms online in a kind of accessible and inclusive and a best practice way. So you can take a look at their blog, and they have a blog about how we're using webinars to demonstrate how quick and easy it is to use Gov.uk forms. This might be a bit niche, but you can take a look at that, and I'll send you a link to it. And they also have you know, a blog on how to get started using Gov.uk forms. So it's just like a case of like they're a few years ahead of us. What can we learn from their experience, and what can we, you know, how can we take it further in Ireland? Yeah, so that's just a little bit of like information, folks, for you. Any questions there about that? Or before I move on to the next part? Or any points or reflections? I'd love, Catherine, you just make that point aloud about wanting to do things online. Can you talk, just make that point? Why would you prefer that? If you feel comfortable speaking. Hey,
Well,
Catherine.
I would prefer online because I think like a proper online form, then they don't have to decipher handwriting. It's easier for them, quicker, and I mean, I don't mind, you know, but like some of these forms are so long. It's like I don't want to have to fill in 20 pages of
I agree with
stuff
you. Yeah.
by hand.
Yeah. It
Like
just
the
seems
housing application, or even like the back to education. It's so long.
Yeah. It does seem like from a different generation, we're still kind of catching up. So I suppose the slide that I'm kind of showing you here is the HSE and the government trying to catch up a little bit, and it's good that the principles are there. So yeah, so we're kind of in a between. I think we're kind of in between stage, aren't we? Lovely. So software to help us. So like, I'll be honest, folks. Like in the work that I do, I use Microsoft Words, and I try to make it like I focus on the language, I focus on the structure, I focus on the flow, and then I might convert it to PDF. And I'm not you know, a whiz at kind of the one that we looked at with the Government of Ireland with the housing application, where we used they made it editable. I'd have to do a bit of work to get to, you know, be able to get to that level. So the question I'm going to ask you is there a software application that you use in your organization that you'd like to share with the team? And yeah, if there's any resources you have mentioned already, you might mention them again in the chat. So are there any software or applications you use beyond Microsoft Word or Adobe that you'd recommend? I know I'm going to ask you to do my job for me, but any recommendations in the chat? Yeah, Amy, if you fancy, do you fancy just telling us a little bit about Canva and how you use it? If your mic is working.
Hello, Dan. How are you? Yeah, I use Canva all the time at work. I work as the PPG coordinator, so I support staff to create policies, procedures, protocols, and guidelines. And then sometimes out of that comes forms or various pathways. So trying to make them more, I suppose, visually presentable, that encourage people to complete them. You know, the pathways when they're admitted in. So we've kind of taken more a visual approach. So yeah, that's why just on how we structure the forms, it's really good. It's a subscription service, so I just pay for it every month. But it has made my job a lot more entertaining because it's nicer. You end up with nicer forms, to be honest, and it's good.
Yeah, and I think like for
There's
me,
templates that you can use as well, so you just have to check it. Like you have to kind of do your run through like the various sites, just to make sure it's content correct. But just its visual tools it's really good.
Lovely. And Emma has, thank you so much, Amy. That's excellent. And Emma's saying you can get Canva Pro for free if you're a registered charity. That's
okay.
That's good to know, Emma. Thank you so much. Lovely. Yeah, and Mary to use Blackboard Ally. Okay, that's interesting. That's kind of in the higher education field. People mentioning SurveyMonkey are Qualtrics. I don't know Qualtrics. Online forms. Okay. Is there anything else? People mentioning citizen information to help people to assist people with forms. That is good. And Smart Survey. That's another one. Never heard of that one, Chris. Do you want to use Smart Survey? Tell us a bit about that. What's that? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, so the HSC use Smart Survey, so we use it a lot for I suppose for registrations for club events and stuff. I suppose it also gives us the ability the other side of it to gather the data, kind of clear it in Excel spreadsheets. So yeah, there's lots of different options for completing forms, and then from an admin side, it's a lot easier as well.
Okay, that's a new one to me. But you using the HSC, Chris, that's interesting. Yeah. Lovely. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I mean, we're kind of talking a little bit about still about print and paper forms, folks, because that's what a lot of people still use. But I think online forms, you know, and that's the way that it's just so much easier for everyone, isn't it? But then again, we have to make sure that it's safe and we're keeping the data secure. So that's why maybe the HSC use Smart Survey. I know in NALA we were using Google Forms and it was like, oh, this isn't quite as robust as it should be. So we moved to Microsoft Forms as a default one. So you make sure those questions are answered about its robustness and security. Lovely. But let's move on to so thanks so much, folks, for putting your answers in the chat. That is really, really good. And just to keep you working hard, we're going to look at a youth reach application form. So I want to thank Paula for sending this in from Kildare and Wicklow Youth Reach Centre. And so Paula, do you want to just kind of talk us through how this form, how it's put together and how you use it with your learners? Paula, are you there? Just unmute and speak if you can.
Okay, can you hear me?
Hey, Paula.
Hi, how are you doing? So we provide an education for early school leavers from traditional schools, age maybe 15 to 18. And some of them would have learning difficulties, some of them might have dyslexia. And we have decided in light of that to go back to the beginning in order to make our materials more user-friendly. This is our application form. This is the original application form. It's a paper application form. And usually students and their parents are encouraged to come in and complete the application form so we can assess what supports they need and maybe where they're at in terms of literacy. So it's just aiming this at students and trying to use plain language, plain English, in a better format, and you have done edit 1, which looks very good. So this one is the original one.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you, Paula. Yeah, so yeah, well, we've 8 minutes, folks. So I sent you a link to this, and I mean, I think my strength as to help you is mostly in plain English editing in terms of flow. So when I look at something like this, what I'm looking at is like, okay, does it have a good flow? Are the instructions clear? Well, I mean, the instructions are here. they're like the start, they're quite clear. You have section 1, you have section 2, you have a section 3 here, you have section 4, you have section 5, you know, and then you have like the data protection consent, like that. So I think, like for me, in terms of like if someone asked me to plain English edit this, or it's what I could do, I'd be thinking in terms of like what's the structure, and the structure there is quite clear. The like when I see things like when I see a section starting at the bottom, I think okay, that's just an oversight. Let's just move that to the top of the next page, and then we'll mess up the whole form by creating a space there. But like yeah, I'm a big fan of starting like a section on a new page and having one section per page. That makes things very long, but it can be useful. So I think that's the main thing I look at, like flow and structure. Because I think everything else is quite good. Like the data protection consent, like having things side by side like that. It makes sense to have things on one page, but then is it the easiest thing for people to use? So I'm thinking, you know, what would it look like on 2 pages, or what would it look like if we can combine that data protection consent into one page, or one piece of text rather than having to like potentially read it twice. And I thought, you know, it's quite strong. I know I'm going through this quite quickly, folks. So that's kind of what yeah, that's the things. Think of structure, think of flow, and then think of language, you know, and then think of how you can plain English things. So when I had a go at plain English editing it, which you also have sent to your email, and yeah, so it's a case of just of like it makes it a little bit longer, but I'm trying to make it just kind of flow a bit more. So please take the center you're applying for. You know, if this was an online one, you have a drop-down menu, but like we're in print, could you have a drop-down menu in editable PDF? Maybe you could. So you can look at that. And just making the instructions like stand out a bit more, having them at the start, and then having like one section. Like I'm always trying to chunk things or nest things or front-loading things. So in personal information, here's their learner details. There's that. Here's the next of kin details, or if you want to use a different word, next to you know, parent or guardian or whatever. So you just have that there. And then you're just trying to like break it up into little chunks. So here's the school details. Here's the supports in school, so you can kind of flow. Here's the learning needs. Here's other education. Here's the employment. And here's the personal statements. I'm trying to give a bit more space. And then support services. So the original one was quite tight in terms of spacing. So I thought, okay, that's gonna be hard to write in. So maybe just having more space. It doesn't mean you have an extra page, but you know, that's something to look at. And yeah, just like always trying to break it down. Here's medical card details. Here's family doctor. So you're thinking in terms of chunks. And what else? And then there's a bit of complicated language in some of them. So if I copy and if I show you this again, like this part here. So it's just this is a case of a bit of the passive voice. So they have section 5, learners age 15 years, to be completed by a parent or guardian. So maybe you could just turn that into a bit more instruction, like please complete this, parents or guardians confirm. So it's just a case of like changing the language to talk directly to the parent or guardian. So like maybe you could have like please confirm or I confirm for the chat. So you're just kind of trying to make it a bit simpler. Yeah. Is there anything else I want to say about it? And then I had a go at turning the section 6 into like, here it is written in for the applicant under 18. Here it's written for the applicants 18 or over. So it makes it a bit longer, which is a consideration in terms of resources and paper, but it makes it a little bit easier. Or you could test them. You could test A and B, but it can be hard to do as well for time. But yeah. So that was a little whirlwind tour, folks, of how I approach something as an editor. Taking a step further, I'd probably look to maybe get a designer or someone who's more familiar with design to see what they could do in terms of making it a bit better. Yeah. Helen, you got your hand up. Hi, Helen. Good to see you.
Hi, Sean. Paul, I was just wondering, how do you overcome the learner detail form? I know all the information is here.
You just muted, Paul. Sorry. Just go ahead and unmute.
The student usually comes into the office and completes the application form with an interview with or without parents. And we're keeping in mind that sometimes parents might also have literacy difficulties. So they're helped with the form.
But do you not have to fill out the standard dreaded learner detail form?
Oh, we do, yeah. But this is the very first point of contact before we get to that. Okay. So yeah. So this is what we're starting with. We said we go at the very beginning and review all the materials to make them user friendly. This is the first one.
Yeah,
And I
kind of
know the
sketchy.
one you're talking about. Yeah.
I thought we were in for some movement out there.
You never know. You never know.
Sean,
Hopefully we
you'll have
get
to send that on to Solus.
very good. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Paul.
Mary, do you have a?
Yeah, can I just ask one question? And
course,
it's
yeah.
probably not related to the form, but for this, does Outreach only let in children with diagnosed conditions? Because an awful lot of kids out there with undiagnosed conditions that probably don't know they have, many of those conditions. It was just a question I had about Outreach. Sorry, Sean.
That's okay, Mary. This is what we're
No,
here.
they
We're here to
don't
connect each other. Go on. Yeah.
They don't necessarily have to be diagnosed. No, some people are, some are not. Some we can arrange for diagnosis in terms of dyslexia, that kind of thing. So we provide supports for our
Thanks, Paul. I
students.
just sorry, I was just going off topic. Sorry about that.
Don't worry, yeah.
So I don't want to get too bogged down in the process, but it's essential as well, because that's what the user cares about. So, like, Paul, is this like on this? I think Brian's point here is like, does this mean that we're going to have standard Solus form and then also this form that they have to fill out, or is that your point, Brian?
For us, this is just for Youth Reach in Leaflet. This is done off our own bat. I'm literacy support down there.
Yeah.
So I signed up for these webinars, and we thought maybe we'll try to create something ourselves, start at the beginning, and this is just where we're at the moment.
Lovely.
But having said that, we do teach differently. It's just the initial forms. All the teaching is geared towards students with videos and, all kinds of stuff. So it's not necessarily paper-based at all. It's Teams-based.
Lovely. Thanks, Paula. Yeah. That's really interesting. And thank you so much for sending it in, and because that makes things just a bit more relevant to us all. So folks, I've just run out of time. So before everyone abandons me forever, I'm just going to go through the last parts. Okay, so thank you so much. So I'll stick around for any questions and answers, folks, after I officially end. So please do stick around if you have a question or answer. I'll have a look through the chats, and I'll pick out any resources that I mentioned, and I'll make sure that I email them to you. So if you're interested, folks, in learning more about plain English and like events like this and suggesting events we should plan in NALA related to plain English and things like that, do get in touch on the NALA Plain English Network. So that's a LinkedIn network. We've got 532 members. You could be the 533rd, folks. So think about joining, and you'll get in touch with like lots of other members about like plain language. Other things I should promote: we have a webinar like this, free webinar on the 12th of November from 2 o'clock until 3 o'clock, a bit of a different time to keep you on your toes. And the idea is like looking at leaflets and print materials. So if there's anything you're working on, like in terms of print materials, please do send it on, and we'll talk about how we can use the plain English guidelines. There's a NALA Adult Literacy Learner Day on the 16th of October. So put that in your diary, folks. If you have any adult learners who want to like attend a day out, meet other learners, have like a nice meal, do some workshops with great instructors, that's happening in the Ashling Hotel in Dublin. So yeah, 16th of October, spread the word, folks. I'll send you a link to that. And then if you want to learn more about literacy awareness, or how literacy affects people in society and how we can help and support them. I've used that so much. You can check out our e-learning on our platform Learn with NALA, so check that out. We have a couple of ones there like understanding adult literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy, become literacy friendly. Kind of there ones for society, and this one's there for tutors. So that's it, folks, for today. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and thanks to Paula again, and thanks for all your questions. So I'll stick around, but nice to see you.
Hi, Sean.
Hi there. Who's that?
Yeah,
Paula.
it's Paula. Yeah. I had problems getting in. I think I might have had the wrong link, so I missed the first 25 minutes. Can I see that again?
So because you registered for this webinar, Paula, I'll send you. Everyone will get like a recording of the webinar.
Oh, perfect. Great.
Yeah, everyone will get a recording, and then I have to transcribe it and put it up on YouTube, and that'll take me a few days, but it'll eventually be up on YouTube.
Okay, perfect. And were there any reactions to the Youth Reach form, or was it just showed when I was here?
Yeah, we kind of
Yeah.
we kind of kept it to the end. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it looks good. Some of the words probably need changing a bit, but it
Okay.
looks really well the way it is. Can I ask what forms you use to create that, or what software?
So like for me, Paula, like I just use Words, and then I
Yeah.
converted it to PDF, using Microsoft Word to convert to Adobe PDF, and like if we could talk about this like another like
Yeah.
separately. But if I was going to take the next step, like we have a person in Al who's quite good with Adobe and PDF and could take it a step further in terms of making it editable. Like I'm not sure if you were there for the one we looked at from the housing adaptation grant, but yeah, you could make it a bit more editable, meaning that if a person was printed it, they could use it. And if a person wanted to use a PDF, they could input the information. So that would be kind of the next step, making kind of someone with the design eye to look at it.
Okay, so is this the next seminar, or is this something we have to do ourselves?
Make it something you have to do yourself, Paula.
Okay, and do you recommend where to go to do that?
I have a few names. I don't want to say them aloud.
Yeah, that's fine.
So maybe I'll email them to you if that's okay, because I
If you
wouldn't
can
want to.
email them
Yeah,
to me, that's perfect. That's great.
lovely.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you, Paula.
So
And
I'll be in touch, okay?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Bye now. See ya.
Talk again soon.
Hi,
Bye.
Sean. There was a few people looking for links like the website app that reads text and documents and one that converts reports to podcasts.
Right.
So maybe when you're sending out slides and the recording, those links could go into the email as well.
Yeah, we could I can show you now, folks, if you're still there. So this is something called Notebook LM. Are you using this, Katrina, at all?
I'm not. No, that's the
Oh,
first.
okay. So this is Notebook LM, and folks, I'm a real like my job. I'm such a spoof for my job. I heard about this yesterday, and I started using it yesterday. Now I'm talking to you about it at a webinar. So just let's bear that in mind. So basically, like if you have a really long document, and then it'll convert into a podcast, and you'll have like these two AI voices, but they sound really real. They sound like so real, and they'll talk about like, oh, did you know that NASA is planning to launch a new nuclear, it's like, and it's really engaging, and so I'd recommend checking that out, and I'll send you a blog article from the gentleman in Invisible Thread who wrote about it. That's where I learned about it. So yeah, it's called Notebook LM. It's from Google, and it's just another powerful generative AI tool. Has anyone used it at all?
Not yet.
So yeah, have a bash with that and see what you can do. And put in. I was talking to a friend of mine who works in Google, and she put in something that was really, really dry, and she had to be informed about, and she felt that it really informed her about it. And then she put in something that she had written, and it was quite long. And then she said, "Oh, what are the key points?" And like did a podcast version, and she was startled with how accurate it was. So maybe do that as a mess around. Grand. Any other points or questions, folks, before I also I'll have a look through the chat, and I'll send it all in an email, so you have the links to what people have mentioned, and then we'll and then I'll hopefully see you in November. And when do you hope to have the recording? So Chris, you should have the recording soon. That's very vague. You should have the recording soon, and then it'll be on YouTube in probably a week or two. It takes a bit while because I have to transcribe it and make sure it's accessible and the captions are correct. That takes a bit of time. Lovely.
Bye now.
Great.
I'm going.